Christian, you're good to go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Book Talk, Field Notes from a Pandemic with Ethan Liu. My name is Christian Mehta, and I am the AVP of Engagement at Ryerson University. We are really excited about this webinar series for Ryerson alumni and friends and can't wait to hear more about this amazing book written by a Ryerson alumni author. Before I introduce Ethan to you today, I want to pay my respects to the Indigenous peoples, elders, and ancestors who stewarded and cared for the nature and people who lived on the land that was taken from them and where Ryerson is located today. At the university, we have made important commitments and contributions to our efforts on reconciliation and decolonization, and I invite you to learn more about this work online and in person next time we can get together on campus. A couple of quick reminders. One, this session is being recorded so you can rewatch it and share it with anyone you'd like. Stay tuned for an email with the link. And two, if you have a question for Ethan, please do type it into the Q&A area of Zoom. That's where we'll be choosing your questions from. Ethan Liu's Field Notes from a Pandemic was named among CBC's Best Canadian Nonfiction of 2020. His writing has appeared in The Guardian, The Globe and Mail, Maclean's, the South China Morning Post, The Walrus, and The Washington Post. Ethan is a former Reuters reporter and has served as a visiting journalist at the University of British Columbia. His next book is Once a Bitcoin Miner, Scandal and Turmoil in the Cryptocurrency Wild West. That's going to be a great one too, Ethan. Field Notes from a Pandemic is equal parts travelogue and pandemic guide, which examines the societal effects of COVID-19 and takes readers on a mesmerizing journey around the world that will never be the same. Visiting Beijing in January to see his dying grandfather, Ethan unknowingly walks into a state under siege. And his journey out of China and into other hot zones in Asia and Europe, he finds himself witnessing at the very earliest stages of the virus, items that will forever change the world as we know it today. Wow, Ethan, what an incredible journey you've been on over the last few months. And thank you for sharing this writing with us. Welcome to Book Talk.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great. Okay, so Ethan, let's get right into it. Tell us about the journey back in January 2020 when you arrived in Beijing. What did you encounter when you stepped off the plane?
And stop me if this is something you've heard before. So the book begins right in the thick of it. When I left Toronto, there was no pandemic. But while I was literally in the air, while I was cut off from everything, that was when the epicenter city of Wuhan was sealed off. So I arrived to a totally different world. And I think what was most jarring to me was that there's a long barrier outside the baggage claim exit of the Beijing airport. So normally there's lots of people all pressed against it. You know, they're there to receive the travelers. And so they're all looking at the people coming out. And this time, every single one of them was in a face mask. And this was before we all started wearing it. And so I just walked out and I just saw like a sea of faceless faces. And it all became very real.
Yeah, I can only imagine when I was reading the first chapter, I was just thinking about what might have been cycling through your mind as you entered this kind of space of chaos. Did you get a sense that that chaos was something that was to be expected from the folks who were living there, or was this just all a surprise to everyone?
I think it's a bit of both, because that is a place, China, it has the memory of SARS there. People remember when they had that epidemic, then it wasn't a pandemic yet. And while nobody was actually wearing masks in public, if people have a cough or if they have a flu or something, they wear masks when they go out in the public. But this was definitely something that was on a whole other level. And I don't think anyone expected how events would escalate.
Oh yeah. Well, at what point did you realize that this is something you were going to do in terms of write a book, your field notes from your experiences and observations?
So that actually took a while because when I left China, that was in February, and I think back in Canada it was still normal for everyone. And when I landed in Singapore, it was normal in Singapore, and I thought, maybe this is something confined to China. And when I left Singapore, when I was in Germany, Germany was normal. And I still didn't think that. I thought, perhaps it's an Asia thing, and perhaps it will be like SARS. And SARS was over in quite a short time, relatively compared to this. But it was in Germany, and so this whole book idea is, I can only take half the credit. Half of it is from my agent. So he suggested this.
And if the process of writing as you're reflecting and as you're going through the motions of all the events still unfolding, I'm very curious as to how did you find the process of actually documenting your experiences? Did you find yourself in really trying to kind of come to terms and grips with the not just the experiences, but the impact that experience was having on others?
Mm-hmm. So for me, I think writing is it's a bit of a therapeutic process, and so I don't really view that as a lot of work. For me, it's a form of release, and so I like to use this analogy and stop me if you've heard this before. I really love the Harry Potter series, and I know the author is cancelled now, but that was a big part of my childhood, those books. And one of the devices they have is this thing called a pensieve. So you use your wand, you take a thought out of your head, and you just put it into the device, and you feel better afterwards. So for me, writing, and I did feel like this was quite a lot that I went through, because this trip was planned long ago, and I had a totally different trip in mind. And also, my grandfather hadn't been in good health, and traveling there, and I got kicked out of the seniors home. I was as an aside, I feel quite lucky that I was there when I was, because if I was just a day or two late, I would not have been able to see him. So after everything that I went through, for me, I think writing is perhaps the best way to deal with everything. And so the whole process was a relief, and again, quite therapeutic.
And it's good to have also discussions and dialogue as a result of the writing. I'm sure that you've received a lot of folks who have asked you for some additional perspectives outside of the book itself. But I want to go back to the story itself and the experiences that you write about in contrast and comparison to Singapore and Germany, just your time in China. There are some incredible ways in which you describe the virus following and spreading and changing. I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit about what changes or what was the same with regards to your perception of the virus as you were moving through all of these different spaces and time zones.
Mm-hmm. So this is a thought I have that's not in the book, but it's something I recently started thinking about, that back in Singapore, life is almost back to normal. And so my friends back there, they are, they're eating out, they're going to the theater, they're going to each other's homes. It's like the before times, but there is a difference in that Singapore has a very strict mask rule. So in order to keep the cases low, you have to wear a mask or whenever you are in public, not even indoors, if you're outdoors, if you're walking. And even if you go for a run, you're allowed to not wear a mask. But once you stop running, you have to put on a mask. And because it's a small country, so they're able to enforce that. So, and here we don't really have mandatory mask rules. We have to wear it indoors, but it's not really that enforced. It's not really that enforced, and so we don't have a life that is normal. So, and it's quite interesting that what people are willing to accept and what they are willing to sacrifice. It's a bit different that way.
Yeah, and I can imagine that the connections you maintain back to those places, is certainly informing, how we are all responding, and how governments and others are coordinating efforts, or trying to at least coordinate those efforts. What's it like now, based on the conversations you're having with your family and others in those spaces?
Well, like I said, Singapore's mostly back to normal. But I think one thing I would add is that something I think to me quite disturbing came out of Singapore, that their contact tracing app, it was revealed in Parliament that they have used it for non-contact tracing purposes. They use that information for crime fighting purposes, and not just COVID-19 crime. It's not just like people gathering or something. It's they used it to solve a murder. And if you think about it, what are the implications of that in the future in Singapore? The government will know everyone with whom you come into contact. And while the contact tracing app is not mandatory, eventually it's going to be mandatory if you want to enter a shopping mall, if you want to take the bus. So you don't have to have it, but if you want to participate in civic life, you're going to have it, and it's effectively mandatory. So the government will know all of your contacts, and that's it's quite a disturbing implication.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure as a journalist, you are really thinking about the impact on what that means in terms of freedom of expression, and just the openness around movement and of bodies and people, and what that even means just for broader question of democracy.
Yeah, and I think that there are going to be good things to come out of the pandemic. I think historically, when we have such events, that is when people start demanding a greater role for the state in their lives. And I think in many places we will see a greater role of the state in people's lives. We will come out of it in some ways with a more progressive society, but also we should be wary of authoritarian creep. And I think in many parts of the world, things are unfortunately heading in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, you refer to and discuss in the book a number of other plagues and eras that have this echo effect now, and we're revisiting or reliving it, namely the bubonic plague and Spanish flu. Tell us your perspective on how you think those plagues helped shape our understanding of COVID-19.
So I think that to me is one of the most fascinating things that I write in the book, that it is those plagues in the past that shaped the modern world. And if you look at a medieval society back then, the government did not have a big role in the lives of their people. All they did was just basically two things. They collected taxes, and if they went to war, they conscripted the men, but that was it. But because of the plague, they started to realize that, hey, we have to take care of our borders. We have to control who comes in and who goes out. We have to haul people off to quarantine, and they needed people to enforce that. So you have first temporary health boards, but eventually permanent ministries of health. And you start guarding your borders. You need people to do that. You collect more taxes, and soon the idea of this modern state, we owe it to back then. And if you look at, say, modern liberalism, basically, to simplify it, the idea that life is harsh and we need an authority to protect against that. That was born during the plague of London, and so if you look at this plague now, like what we talked about just now, perhaps we will have a more progressive society. People are demanding that the government have a bigger role in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I really appreciated about this book is the level of detail and research you went into, looking at all of the different sources that were informing how the story of COVID-19 is being told, and also how COVID-19 is seen differently depending on where you are and what media you embrace or tune into. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about the research process, because I'm really blown away by, the content that you curate, you bring together with your own story. What was
Oh.
So we're still here, Ethan. It looks like Christian might have just cut out for a second.
Okay, if we're still live, I will answer his question. What was the research process like? I think basically I read a lot. I'm a guy who spends most of my time reading. I don't have many hobbies, and that is about it. And I think one of the interesting things that Christian talked about, the many different sources I consulted, because and how people get their news from different perspectives. There is one person in the book. He actually is a friend of mine. I count him as a friend, but he became more and more radicalized throughout the COVID-19 thing. And I think he's probably always like that, but he had never been that outwardly. He was one of those anti-vaxxers, and they say when people believe in one conspiracy theory, they believe in all of them. So he is a guy who believes in all of them, and I did spend quite a lot of time reading what he posts, and they fascinate me in many ways. Christian,
I'm back.
So I basically answered your question while you were gone. I ended that by talking about the if you remember from the book, there's a friend of mine who believed in all sorts of conspiracy theories, and I just found that fascinating.
Well, yeah, and sorry about that. I don't know what happened on my end here, but one of the things that I was also really quite intrigued about with regards to your writing is just a very honest portrayal and opening up of your own life and your family life in particular. And I'm just wondering about how your family reacted to reading the book.
This is something I wasn't expecting to reveal here, but it's going to be in the Globe anyway tomorrow. So my grandfather has since died, and during the funeral they burned a copy of my book with him, because in the front of the book there are a couple of Chinese characters I wrote there dedicated to my grandfather, and to be perfectly honest, it was a complete afterthought for me. And in the end, my editor was asking me, "Hey, do you want to put in a dedication?" I said, "Oh, okay, I'll dedicate it to my grandfather." But I think to them, it was very significant, and they basically felt it was a very big deal. And so I'm not sure if my grandfather believes in a sort of afterlife, but I hope he's learning English then. I hope he's reading my book.
Well, it's that's thank you for sharing that personal story and impact on your family. it is something that all writers, when writing about a personal journey, often face. I hear. I want to ask you briefly about Ryerson and your time at Ryerson. So you went to Ryerson, studied journalism. Tell us a little bit about what this book, how this book is connected to your experiences as a student of journalism and writing.
So there's actually a very big connection, because I think learning about writing and also reading and appreciating literature, that was about half of what I studied at Ryerson. And I think most significantly, I was in this feature writing class taught by Kamal El-Soleili. And I think that was the first time I was coached on how to write long form. And I think that that informed a lot of my writing. And also, I read a lot of Shakespeare at Ryerson. I had an English minor, and there's this other class. I thought it was a complete bird course, but it ended up being one of my favorites. It's Caribbean literature, and it's this V.S. Naipaul. That was what was taught to us. He's a Nobel Prize winner. His book, House for Mr. Biswas, I will forever remember that. Yeah, and I think my education at the school probably in many ways shaped me as a writer.
Yeah, that's great. And some of the best fiction is coming out of the Caribbean and the Caribbean diaspora. Absolutely. And glad to hear that that's had an influence on your own writing. So we have a few questions in the Q&A, and I want to get into them because we only have a few minutes left. So can you tell us about your experience in China prior to going to Singapore? What really struck you the most?
I guess the swiftness of the lockdown and how they just kicked me out of the seniors' home. And I've probably told this story too many times. Like my grandfather back then, he's not been lucid for very long, but I think he definitely, because I think he takes in the somberness of the people's voices and the heaviness of the footsteps. He always thought something was wrong because I was holding his hand as I was getting kicked out, and he just really gripped on with all the strength that he could muster. And I don't think he's not a guy with a lot of strength left. So I'll never forget that. And soon another thing I can't forget was the emptiness of the Beijing subway. And I go there many times, and I can say, like, before COVID, I have never been able to get a seat on the Beijing subway. It's always very crowded, no matter the time of the day. But now it's just a little after rush hour, but empty as a husk.
Wow. Yeah, it's quite striking. And another question that's somewhat connected to that comment or experience is, what do you believe will be the experience when you go back to these places in terms of just how people interact with one another? Do you have a sense of what's in store?
I don't think things will ever go back to normal. I think things will definitely become better from what we know right now, and I think eventually we will get a vaccine, and I think vaccination status will probably replace the requirement for tests or the requirement for quarantine. But I think now that we have realized that we can move so much of our lives online, I think things that we previously thought had to be done in person, a lot of those will disappear. And along with that, so there's an essay I wrote in the Lit Review of Canada. It's about how we lose the element of serendipity when we move so much of our lives online. If this is an in-person event, you take the subway there. You never know what's going to happen on the subway. You never know what's going to happen at a book talk. You never know who's going to sit next to you. You never know who you're going to have to borrow a lighter from when you go out for a smoke break. And all these things, these random interactions in your life, most of the time it's nothing, but sometimes it's everything. And, I think we're going to lose a lot of that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way of thinking about the future. Well, in the here and now, questions come in about any response or backlash that you've received from within the Chinese or Asian communities, or even from other diplomats. Have you what's been the review and take like of Field
Yeah.
Notes?
So there hasn't been anything actually, and I don't think I was too critical of China. I didn't say anything that hasn't already been said, and I do think we think of China as a lot more barbaric than it is. But you know, the Globe and Mail has a guy in China, and he writes about stuff China doesn't like all the time.
But even within the community here in Ontario or in Canada, has everyone embraced Field Notes?
Yeah, I think I wrote about this in the Star. There was this bizarrely racist email from one guy, but that was the only one. I think so far the reception has been very well. I did get this 1-star review on Goodreads, and all the guy said was, "I read about this book in the media." So probably given too many interviews.
Well, we are going to bring you back when you write your next book, just so you know.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, listen, this book features food. It's laced with your experiences of eating. And I want you to talk a little bit about why you chose to kind of create that experience for your readers.
So basically 2 reasons. One is because I'm a great fan of the Game of Thrones series, and I have read all the books, and you know, there's very glorious and generous depictions of food in there, and that's something I try to replicate. But also because I am a guy who likes food, and I like novelty. I like trying things I haven't tried, and I think when I write this book, you know, it's entirely from my perspective, and you know, there are things that are given that described a lot. There are things that aren't described so much. So those are things that stick out to me in my memory. So when you read it, you're kind of viewing this entire journey through my eyes.
Well, I did have to I found myself often hungry after reading a chapter or two throughout the experience of reading. So I want to thank you for that. Ethan, one more question, really around your next piece of writing. And so I mentioned at the outset that you're writing something about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Tell us what we're going to expect.
So this is narrative nonfiction, and it depicts scandal and turmoil in the cryptocurrency Wild West. It is set largely in Calgary, but it also goes to other places, and there are the interactions with the major players in cryptocurrency, and I think this is an important story to tell, because I think these are intricate plots and sagas that happen underneath the gaze, but the border between that world and the mainstream world it's blurring by the day, and new entrants they find themselves stepping into a deep unknown, and this is the book meant for the general reader, and it's basically a story. It's written to read like a novel.
Well, I look forward to it. It sounds like it's going to be a great read, and can't wait for it to come out. When are we looking for a date in stores?
September.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Coming up soon. So, listen, half an hour just flew by in chatting with you about Field Notes from a Pandemic. Thank you so much, Ethan, for this great gift of a book, and for sharing it with the world. It really is a treasure, and thank you for making time for your fellow alumni and friends today from Ryerson.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Great. And for all of you who've joined us this afternoon, thank you for making the time. Field Notes from a Pandemic by Ethan Liu, Ryerson alum. We will be sending you an email with this broadcast, but also with a link to the publisher where you can purchase the book. Hope you do enjoy reading it. And if you have enjoyed reading it already, like I have, we'll take some time to continue to reflect on Ethan's experience and our connections to his. Thank you all for a wonderful half an hour. Ethan, excellent writing. Can't wait for your new book to come out. And we appreciate all that you are doing to tell great stories, important stories of our time.
It's a pleasure.
All right, everybody, have a great afternoon, and we'll be in touch with more book talks coming to you soon. Bye for now.